Welcome to Retirement Rescue Radio, a show specifically designed to help retirees and pre-retirees maximize their financial efficiency so you can live the retirement lifestyle you've always imagined. Your host is Nate Miller, investment advisor representative and author of the CPR Retirement Rescue Roadmap. Nate discusses thoughts and ideas from some of today's most knowledgeable professionals in the field of finance. He offers strategies along the way to help you make better financial decisions so you can maximize your retirement. This is Retirement Rescue Radio.
For Retirement Rescue Radio listeners, we've got a very special guest with us today. We've got Carl Honoré with us. Carl, how are you today?
I'm very well. Good to be with you.
Great. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate you being on here. Are you ready to help rescue some retirements?
I'm ready to do just that.
Awesome. Great. Now, so in the intro, we went through a bio, and honestly, we can find out a lot of that information online if we wanted to search for it. But I always like to ask a question to my interviewees in order to help them become a little bit more human or let people know a little bit about them that, they can't find just by through a internet search. So is there anything interesting or unique about you or something you've done in your life that you'd like to share with my listeners?
Yeah. If I spool back to when I think I was 20 years old at the time. I was in Brazil during Carnival when everything goes crazy and the normal rules are not observed. And I entered, as you do, a transvestite beauty contest, and I won. I hasten to add now that I was not then, and I am not now, and have never been in between a transvestite. Not that I have anything against transvestites, but that's a little nugget that you won't find on my normal resume.
That sounds like it would have been a fun contest.
The after party was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, I've got a little history in theater and film. And so like dressing up and acting out certain things is something that's fun. So I can see how that would be fun. So awesome. Appreciate that. Now, so we're going to be talking about a couple different things today that I think really speak to my audience. You've got a book called In Praise of Slow, and then another one called Bolder. And In Praise of Slow is real. Actually, I'm not going to explain it. I want to let you explain it. What is the whole slow movement, and what made you want to actually talk about that or write books about it?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start with telling you how I got into it, right?
Yeah.
I think that when people get stuck in fast forward and every moment of the day becomes a race against the clock, that eventually you run up against some kind of crisis, right? And I'll have a wake-up call to realize that you're racing through life instead of living it. And a lot of people, that wake-up call comes in the form of an illness. The body just says, one day, that's it, we're done here. This is too fast. And you have a burnout or you can't get out of bed one morning. Mm-hmm. My wake-up call came when I started reading bedtime stories to my son. And back in those days, man, I just could not slow down. So I'd go into his room at the end of the day and speed read Snow White. Yeah, I'd be skipping lines, paragraphs. I became an expert at what I called the multiple page turn technique, where you're trying to
I've done that. That caught me. I've done that so many times.
And it never works, right? Because these confounded kids, they know the stories back to front. So my son would catch me out. He'd say, "Daddy, why are there only 3 dwarves in the story tonight?" What happened to Grumpy? And this really lamentable state of affairs went on for quite a long time, until I caught myself flirting with buying a book I'd heard about, a book called The 1 Minute Bedtime Story. So Snow White in 60 Seconds. And I remember hearing about this book and thinking,
oh, wow.
Hallelujah. I need that book now. Amazon, drone delivery. And then the second reaction came rolling in, and it was a light bulb over the head moment. I just thought, whoa, has it really come to this? Am I really in such a rush? I'm prepared to fob off my little boy with a soundbite instead of a story at the end of the day. And that was like an out-of-body experience, total deep, searing epiphany. I thought, I've just lost my compass here. So I kind of set off around the world to investigate not only my own addiction to speed, but the bigger picture. And I came back with pretty good news, which is that wherever you go in the world now, well then, and especially now, I think post-pandemic, more and more people are doing the unthinkable. They're slowing down in every walk of life and discovering that, contrary to what conventional wisdom always tells us, which is that if you slow down, you're boring, you're stupid, you're lazy, you're unproductive, you're roadkill, that the opposite turns out to be true, that by slowing down judiciously at the right moments, people find that they eat better, make love better, teach better, learn better, work better, live better, right? And out of this surge of deceleration around the world has come this thing called the slow movement. Now, I think it's really important for me just to underline up front that when we talk about the slow philosophy with a capital S, nobody means doing everything slowly. Excuse me. That would be absurd. I am not an extremist of slowness. I love speed, right? Faster is often better. We all know that, right?
Do not talk about doing work like the little sloth on Zootopia, the little cartoon that once again my kids watch. No.
There you go. There are times to watch the sloth doing his slow thing, and there are times to get your Roadrunner shoes on, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I am sitting in London now, a city I love, of volcanic energy. I'm going to play hockey tonight, fast sport. I love speed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Slow movement is about doing things at the right speed. So sometimes fast, sometimes slow. Musicians have this wonderful expression. They talk about the tempo giusto, the correct tempo for each piece of music.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of gets at what slow with a capital S is about. It's ultimately a mindset. It's quality over quantity. It's being present in the moment. It's doing one thing at a time. Do you remember when we used to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, really, slow is about doing everything not as fast as possible, but as well as possible. Super simple idea, but one that can just revolutionize in a good way everything you do, which is why in every field of human endeavor now, you will find a slow movement, whether it's slow food, slow sex, slow leadership, slow technology, slow fashion, slow travel, right? People coming to the party and saying, whatever I'm doing, how can I do it better by slowing down to the right speed? So simple idea, but it's got the power to remake our world.
Yeah, there was so many books that I read to my kid where I was trying to switch a couple extra pages, and it was good until he got to be about 3. And then he would just say, skipped a page, and then he would grab it and put it back. And we actually had the little monitor on him one time in the morning before, we hadn't really got up and around, but we could hear him talking, and he was reading Brown Bear. I don't know if you remember that one. There's Brown Bear, and then Chicka Chicka Boom Boom was another one that he had literally memorized the entire book. He was sitting there with the book in his hand, and we could hear him read it in his little 3-year-old lispy voice. And it was word for word. It's like, so yeah, they don't just know it well, they know it word for word. It's crazy.
It's like for them, it's like an incantation, right? Or catechism, right? It's it's woven into their minds and the experience of the moment. And we come along with our big rush and try to power through, and it's just, it's a perfect example of when faster is not better.
Yep. All the Dr. Seuss books are what broke me of that habit. Because I love Dr. Seuss is so fun to put voices with, once again, going back to the theater background. And so then I would not skip anymore. I would be trying to figure out more fun voices to put with all the different characters.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I once I did slow down and start reading bedtime stories without the multiple page turn technique and skipping lines, I fell in love with them, right? Hitherto, they had been almost like a punishment beating. I used to dread bedtime stories. It was so slow. I couldn't bear it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then when I slowed down, I thought, actually, I discovered the magic. And it's interesting. I find I do a lot of work. Obviously, we'll get to this later, working with people in later life and older people with my new work, Boulder. And often this idea of bedtime stories and reading to children comes up again, but it comes up in the second phase. So these are people who are now reading to their grandchildren.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting how often even that generation, people often think that this speedaholic culture, the virus of hurry, is something of the last 20 years in social media. Now, this has been building up for quite some time. And a lot of, people now who are in their 60s, 70s, reading their first bedtime stories to their own grandchildren are remembering that time when they were rushed through the stories and finding the second time round, not only is it easier, but of course it's more fulfilling to slow down and read slowly. My own father I remember him saying that he used to be a speed reader as well when we were kids. And then he just loved reading to my children, his grandchildren, slowly and taking the time. So that's one of the things I think we maybe gain as we get older, if we allow ourselves to, is we make peace with slowness, and we dial into the joy and the beauty and the connection it can bring.
Yeah. Okay. And there's a funny story on one of your TED Talks. You were talking about the irony of getting a speeding ticket while you were researching the slow movement. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I was a card-carrying speedaholic. When I was researching in praise of slow, which is all about the benefits of slowing down. The worst thing about getting the speeding ticket was that I was actually en route to a dinner hosted by Slow Food. Right. So and the worst part is that this was in Italy, right? So
yeah. Oh gosh.
If you've ever been to Italy, to get a speeding ticket there, you've got to be going pretty fast, right? And of course, the absurdity of speed revealed itself in that episode because I arrived so early at the dinner that there was no one there. The door was open. So I just sat on the pavement with my speeding ticket in my hand thinking, oh man, you got to carry on researching this book because you need it really, really badly. Doctor, heal thyself type thing.
Exactly. So future tip on that, my dad was a cop for about 10 years. And he said that if they weren't going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, he wouldn't even look at it. So I drive 9 hours over the speed limit now all the time. And it's worked out. So good. Yeah. All right.
I wonder if that's the same with those fixed cameras they have. Do they cut you 10 miles an hour slack as well? I'm kind of guessing maybe not, but
yeah, that I don't know. That was actually before, or I guess that came about after my dad had already quit. So I don't really know anything about those. So
in my defense, though, I have not been pinged by a speeding ticket since then. So I guess to some extent, I've clearly learned at least that lesson, right?
Definitely. Good deal. And so, yeah, I am one of those guys too, always on the go. I mean, I did grow up on a farm, but what's interesting about that is we always had something to do. We were always working, unless we couldn't see, well, then we just turned on the lights and kept on working. So it wasn't just a 9 to 5 thing. But what's interesting now when I go back, it's like, it's a slower life. And I like going back and just feeling the entire world just slow down a little bit while I'm there. So that's one of the practices, I guess you could say, that I have to help if I feel like I'm too stressed and going too fast. I'll just kind of reset by spending a little bit of time back there.
Well, I like the way you talked about that, because you talked about being busy and having things to do, but not really feeling rushed. So on a farm, that's a very good metaphor, I think, for the way all of us maybe ought to be aspiring to live all of our lives, even if we live in big cities, is sure, you've got stuff to do. You're fully engaged with what you're doing, but you're not rushing it. Each thing, it's like that tempo giusto. So whatever it is you're doing on the farm, likewise, whatever you're doing in Manhattan or Kansas or wherever you are, London, you kind of bring that spirit of calm, of focus, of presence, of giving your full self to those moments. And that means that, on the outside, to somebody who's a road runner and a headless chicken, looks like you're going really slow, but you're getting stuff done. You're enjoying it. You're getting a lot out of it. But you don't feel rushed. And that's sort of the chip change that goes on. I mean, I feel I've got a very clear before and after. Before, I felt rushed all the time. I was always looking at the clock. I always felt like time was running away from me. Now, my life on the outside, to many people, probably doesn't look that different. I still play lots of sports. I have a busy job. I have a family. I have a social life. I love London. I go out to the theater and stuff. I never feel rushed anymore. And that's kind of an internal thing, right? That is hard to measure and is really very personal. And it comes down, I think, to choosing to give yourself fully to a few things and let everything else go. That's a big part of it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Zeroing in on what really matters.
Yep. And then so as we start to get closer and closer to retirement, if somebody's got that go-go tempo, or they've been at that go-go tempo their entire life, maybe not because they are, but because they're forced to, because that's just how we are in the Western world. Now they're getting towards retirement. How could they start slowing down?
Well, I think in one word, slowly, right? I mean, this is one of the ironies of our, roadrunner culture is we're so patient. We even want to slow down fast. Exactly. So people, they'll watch a TED Talk or read a book or go to a seminar and come away with the very sensible message that they ought to slow down for their health, their well-being, for the people around them, and all that stuff. So what do? They start bringing a type A approach to slowing down. So they sign up for meditation. They run across the street to do some yoga. They hurry home to cook a 4-course slow food banquet, right? And that's not the way that slow works, right? It's slowing down is a process. It's baby steps. I think whatever your lifestyle looks like now, if you want to reconnect with your inner tortoise and bring some of that slow, serene sense to every moment of your day, you need to do it slowly. You need to run little pilot projects, for the next week. You look at your social media use. You're spending, 40 hours a week on social media. Next week, switch off and spend 20, and at the end of the week, see what that felt like. Could you go fewer? Move those hours around. Or you just run little pilot projects, I think, in your own life that move you closer towards slow, and stick with what works, drop with what doesn't, modify, play around, forge your own recipe, your own formula for slowing down. But the first piece of advice is always Don't try and slow down too fast. I mean, this is, there's a lot of research that shows when people have a hard stop retirement, that you're working full bore, full throttle, you stop, and that first year is pretty perilous. I mean, the health problems and death rates are very high because people have slowed down too fast. So think of it as a runway, right, or a gentle ramp as you ramp down to a rhythm that is closer to what you want now, maybe than you perhaps did 10 years ago. And don't rush it. Don't rush slow.
Exactly. Don't go cold turkey, I guess. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And so let's say now that let's say they have gotten into retirement now, I've got several clients that have told me, well, I'm retired now, but I'm finding myself busier than ever. And so what would you say to that mindset as well?
Well, I think my book is in praise of slow. I think it could easily have been called in praise of no. Yeah. I think at any age, we all now need to be relearning the lost art of saying no, saying a gentle, polite no, explaining why you're saying a no. So I think one way to start doing that is at the beginning of every week or month is to look at what you've got packed into your calendar for the coming days or whatever. Sit down, really take some time to look it over and ask yourself, put those things in list of importance and drop the bottom, I don't know, 2 or 3, because anyone who is having that conversation inside their head, I'm busier than ever, I'm busy, is too busy usually, right? And almost everyone in that scenario is cramming their schedule with some things that aren't essential, that aren't important, that could go. So I think a starting point is always to pause, look at the big picture, think about how your next week, month, fortnight, whatever it's going to look like. And part of that is streamlining. It's focusing again. This is what brings us back to the slow thing. You slow down in order to zero in on what really matters and let everything else go. Because most of the things that we try to squeeze into our schedule are not that important. You will have forgotten them 6 weeks from now, right? And I think it's really useful as well. I always suggest to people to we all have to-do lists. I always recommend keeping a not to-do list. So as you're looking at your to-do list and removing items from it that seem in the now to be, less important than others, and you think, I'll let this one go, put it on your not to-do list and keep those lists in a drawer somewhere and come back to them 3 months from now. And what you'll see is that on that not to-do list, you'll find things you'll think, well, wow, I totally forgotten that. Back 3 months ago, I thought the world will come to an end if I don't do this. It's essential. It's crucial. It must be done. And then you took the step not to do it and realized later on with a bit of perspective, and it wasn't really that important at all. I mean, very few things are that important. And so keeping those not to do lists is a really good way of removing the anxiety that saying no brings to us. Because, FOMO, right? Fear of missing out is so potent that one way to puncture it is to remind yourself in the longer and medium term just how many bad decisions FOMO pushes us into, right?
And so that's talking about busy. My standard answer, if I ask someone, hey, how have you been? And they answer, oh man, busy. My follow-up question is always busy good or busy bad? Because those are 2 different things. And so how would you, I think you actually just answered that. How would you focus more on the busy good? And that could be the not to-do list, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting you say that busy. I mean, that really shows where we are culturally at the moment, that busy has become a badge of honor, right? It's become an end in itself. And so you do meet people and you say, hey, how you doing? They say busy. And it's not like, oh, I'm well, or I did this, or I learned this today. It's busy. And people feel bad if they're not busy somehow. It feels like failure or surrender, and you're rowing against the tide. And of course, that's what the whole slow movement is about, taking down the busy industrial complex. I mentioned the not to-do list is one way to do that. I think it's helpful to have a buddy or someone that you can bounce off these ideas with. Have someone else who's in a similar boat, who's looking to de-busy their life. Team up with that person. Talk about the things you're both dropping, how you felt about it later. Keep yourselves accountable, right? So just sort of helps, because it's, slowing down alone, you can do it. It's easier to do it together, right? It's easier to be part of something bigger than yourself and to have people buoy you up, chivvy you along when you feel, oh no, panic, I can't say no to this. And they say, well, you said no to that, or, or I said no to this and it didn't, my life didn't end. And so I think it helps to have a tribe of people who are all taking down the cult of busy. There's a wonderful African proverb actually, which kind of gets at what I'm saying here a little bit. And it's this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that's a reminder that slowing down, while it can be a wonderful boost to everything in our individual lives, our health, our creativity, our productivity, all that stuff, that's not the whole story, right? That slowing down really, ultimately, I think you go to the very end, it's about reconnecting us with other people. Speed, hurry, dehumanizes us. Slow rehumanizes us, right? It reconnects us with human rhythms. And part of that is reconnecting us with other people. So don't try to slow down too fast. And if possible, don't try to slow down alone. Try and do it together. That's why people go to AA, right? For Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't do that on your own. You do it in a group.
Yep.
So what we need is kind of busy anonymous, I suppose. Maybe it's the
there we go. Yeah.
Busyness Anonymous.
Busyness Anonymous. Yep. Busy Groups Anonymous. Maybe that would be the title there. So we've had, the whole COVID thing. I want to ask your opinion on this. So forced to lock down, forced to slow down, maybe even, right? So have you seen more people embracing the slow movement because of getting a glimpse of what their life could be like without all the crazy bustlingness going on?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny, at the beginning of the pandemic, when we did get locked down in the world, because effectively what COVID did for many months at a time was impose a global workshop in slowness, on all of us. And it was funny, at the start, a lot of people wrote to me and they said, oh, you must be so happy about this, right? The world has finally been forced to slow down. And I got to say, I've never been happy at any point about COVID. The pandemic is a total nightmare and it's an ordeal for all of us in many different ways. But, right?
Always a but, yep.
There's always a but, and there's always a silver lining. And I think for a lot of people, by forcing us to slow down, by shutting down the outside world, by removing FOMO, there was nothing to be afraid of missing out on, right? Because there's just nothing was happening. We were forced to experience slowness. And a lot of people struggled at first. There were withdrawal symptoms, just like you would expect from you're addicted to the adrenaline of hurry. It's the same as coming off heroin, right? You're uncomfortable. But people stuck with it because they had to. There was no choice. And it was fascinating to see how over time you began to see a different story emerging from people's homes. People said, you know what? This is kind of nice, right? I'm not rushing through red lights to get to Starbucks on time or work on time. I'm sleeping, I'm resting more, I'm talking and connecting more with the people I live with. And people began to take up slow pursuits. I look at the sourdough baking boom and sales of board games like Monopoly are record levels. People have taken up arts and crafts and making music at home, all these really slow things that were part of the slow movement before. But I think the whole pandemic moment has kind of ratcheted up and given it a big boost from below. But what I think maybe the pandemic did most of all was that it gave people the time and the space to reflect. Yeah. And that's something that we lose in a roadrunner culture. We lose the art of reflection. This is a society of speed, and that means it's a society of reaction. We don't have reflection because we're too busy. We're too distracted. We're just moving through our to-do list as fast as possible. What COVID, by forcing us to slow down and shutting us up in our homes, it kind of allowed many of us to reflect, to look inside ourselves and ask those really big questions, such as, who am I? What's my purpose here? Am I living the right life for me? What do I want the next 5, 10, 30 years of my life to look like? You never confront those big questions when you're in fast forward, because all you have bandwidth for is the small questions, like, where are my keys? I'm late for my 11 a.m. Suddenly you have time to sit around and think big picture, connect dots and so on. And it's interesting to see how many people have come out of the pandemic having done that reflection, that existential homework that they'd never done before. And the conclusion they came to was, you know what? The life I was living before, that wasn't the right life for me. So they're leaving bad relationships or changing careers or revamping the way they work or moving from the city to the country or the countryside to the city, changing, all kinds of things, because all of this stuff finally was confronted. We went deep, right? And I guess when you can't go outside, you go inside, right? You can't, and I think when a lot of us went inside, and we were reconnected with ourselves. And that's one of the main benefits of slowing down, is that re-encounter with yourself. Socrates talked about it, right? The importance and the joy and the luminosity of the examined life, right? Taking the time to ask questions, reflect. And that's something that we should be doing at every stage of life, but it's something I think that maybe becomes more imperative and maybe even easier to do. Some research would suggest as we get into the second half of our lives, we get more big picture, if you like, right? More, and I think you'll probably find that, I'm sure, with your clients, that they're taking more time just to sit back and look at the horizon, right? And that's something that can unlock big changes and small changes in our life.
Yeah,
in a good way.
Well, I know I did a lot more reflecting in these past couple of years than what I normally did. End of 2019, yeah, go. So I think the pandemic has helped me move. I didn't know I was going into the slow movement at that time. I wasn't aware of your work. But yeah, I feel like that has brought me a little bit more balance. I mean, not every morning, but almost every morning I'd be up at 5:30 a.m. to work out, and then into the office before 8. Even if I didn't really have anything to do, I was filling those 8 hours or 9 hours from like 8 to 5, just because that was what I thought you had to do, you know? Yeah. And so now I've gotten more strategic about what needs to happen in those days, what I need to do, what I need to delegate to my team. And therefore I'm getting far more done, and I feel less rushed doing it.
So, there you go. That's what I call the delicious paradox of slow, that by slowing down, focusing on what really needs to be done, letting everything else go, zeroing in and giving your full bandwidth, energy, time, attention to the things that are really important. Not only do you get better results, but man, you often get them faster, right? In order to slow down, I mean, the Formula One drivers talk about this, right? In order to go faster, sometimes you have to go slower, right? And for me, the bottom line is basically that in a world addicted to speed, slowness is a superpower. And you've just illustrated it right there with your own experience.
Yeah, definitely. And so let's transition to your book, Bolder, now. And you even talked about a little bit about the slow movement transition, but you talk more about ageism. So talk a little bit about ageism and making the most of a stronger life.
Sure.
Longer
life. It seems to me that we live in a profoundly ageist culture. And ageism, discrimination, stereotyping on the basis of chronological age, all around us. And it affects young and old, but let's be honest, it falls more heavily on those of us north of 40, because ageism is really at its heart tangled up with the cult of youth, with the idea that younger is just better. That aging is somehow a form of failure or a disease or for losers. Mark Zuckerberg famously stood up on a stage and just said in public, "Young people are just smarter." And you think, what? Can you imagine if? It just boggles the mind how ageism and the cult of youth are kind of woven into our vernacular, the phrases we use. I mean, you forget something, it's a senior moment. You talk about being on the wrong side of 40, showing your age, over the hill, all these expressions that just reinforce the myth, right? And it is a myth, a lie, that it's all downhill from 30 or 35, right? So that's ageism. And I guess I realized with my earlier books, I was taking on the cult of speed. What I'm doing with Bolder is I'm taking on the cult of youth, right? I wanted to know for my own personal reasons, because all my books start with some kind of existential crisis, in my own life. And I was starting to feel, where it started for me actually was at a hockey tournament. I was playing, with my team. We were in the quarterfinals, struggling to beat a team we'd annihilated the year before, 0-0. And I could feel the indignation and nerves coursing through my teammates. And then out of nowhere, I scored a highlight reel goal, the kind of goal that I will be reliving on my deathbed, years from now. And
you hope somebody got on video.
If only, right? Yeah. And so we were in the semifinals. I came off floating on air, and one of the organizers of the tournament came up to me and said, "I've been looking at player profiles," he said, "and guess what? Turns out you're the oldest player here." And I thought, whoa. I mean, I knew I was one of the oldest. I'm not deluded, but suddenly to be the oldest just rocked me to the core. And it's like all these questions began crowding in. I thought, well, are people laughing at me behind my back? Do I look out of place here? Should I take up a more age appropriate pastime.
Yeah,
bingo?
now it's the whole "do I have a booger on my face" moment. Yeah.
It was totally that. And I thought, wow, here I am playing well, having fun. And then suddenly my chronological age took on this terrible power. And I just felt so awful. And I realized that I'd always been an ageist myself, and it was all coming together. And I thought, God, is there a better, more hopeful narrative about aging out there? I really hope so. And so I kind of set off and spent a year or so traveling around the world investigating. And I came back with the good news that there is a very, very different narrative to tell that, obviously some things as we get older get worse, but many things stay the same. And some, actually quite a few actually get better. So I guess that's the message of Boulder, is that there's a completely different narrative story to tell ourselves about aging, one that's more realistic, more honest, and much more optimistic.
Yeah.
And for me, it was transformational. I used to be ashamed of my age. I used to be terrified of aging. I'm totally not that now at all. I'm out there. In fact, I'm about to play a tournament in this weekend up in the north of England, and we're getting special shirts for the tournament. And I've got my age on there. I'm 54 now, so I'm putting my 54 on there, so that when I go blowing past some of those young guns, they can look at my number and think, oh yeah, there's that 54-year-old leaving me in the dust. So I'm totally, and I'm looking forward now. I'm seeing aging as a process of opening doors instead of closing them now, which is which is the way we all should approach it.
And maybe this is just part of my stubborn personality, but I have always hated age stereotypes because I exercise a lot. And when I hit 30, I had a lot of people that wanted to speak their opinion into my life about how they thought everything was going to go now. It's like, oh, it's all downhill now. You're going to start seeing things in different places that aren't supposed to be there. And then I hit 40, and then the same thing happened, right? I had the same people tell me that. And hitting either of those milestones hasn't really affected anything. I feel like I'm in the best shape that I've been in pretty much in my entire life right now. And I'm 41. I'll be 42 here in about a month and a half or so. And so, yeah, I just look at it getting better, and I can't wait to hit 50 and have those people tell me the same thing and then prove them wrong again. Right. And I had one guest on here that, how you hear the sayings like 50 is the new 30 or 60 is the new 40 or something like that. And she said, no, 50 is the new 50.
Yeah. That's exactly I never use that expression, 40 is the new whatever, because 40 is 40 and 50 is 50. And each person will define what 40, 50, 60, 65, whatever means to them. And I actually think it's ageist to say 70 is the new 50, right? It's sort of saying, well, you should be ashamed of being 70. Actually, you're 70 because you're, in good shape, physically, whatever. You actually are kind of 50 when you're not, right? And in a way, you're denying 20 years of life. I mean, Muhammad Ali said once, whoever is the same at, I think it was 50 as they are at 30, has wasted 20 years of life, right? And that's so true. Think of all the loving, the learning, the laughter that's gone into those 20 years. Why would you want to deny that? Why would you want to expunge that from the record and masquerade as a version of yourself that's 20 years younger? Why not be proud, own your age, whatever it is, and then just go out there and show the world what you can do, right?
Exactly. Be an inspiration. It's like, this is what 50 or this is what 60, whatever the age, this is what this can look like.
Exactly.
Like, it doesn't have to look like what everybody says.
And one reason I feel very confident that we will take down ageism eventually is I think social media is a big help for this. Now, obviously, some of social media is voraciously and ferociously cult of youthy, right? But that's not the whole story there. Instagram, it's full of people in their 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever, 100, uploading photos and videos of themselves every day that show their version of being, 50 something, 60s. And those versions are so different from the downbeat, grim stereotype that aging, like you were saying earlier, it's all game over at 30, it's downhill from 40. No, they're showing that, with a little luck and the right attitude, that any age can be a time of wonder, discovery, romance, productivity, creation, adventure. It's so much of it is down to us. And I think that's a really hopeful message to put out there.
Absolutely. And what's interesting, even when we're talking about success, whether that's in business or, any other part of your life, outside of I guess sports, because that's kind of a young man's game. But what most people don't hit their, their biggest success until later in life, 40s, 50s, and beyond. So it's amazing that this ageism is happening, because at 41, I feel like I've got a ton of stuff left ahead of me to accomplish, and everything that's happened behind me, it has just led up to this. And so yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I had the similar experience to what you were describing earlier. I remember when I was 29, I thought, God, I got to get it all done because 30, it's game over, right? It's all downhill. And then I got to 30 and I thought, actually, I'm flying pretty high. Got to 40 thinking, oh, that's really game over. No, now I'm 50, feeling, I'm feeling at the top of my game in so many ways. And I'm expecting and hoping that the same will be at 60. And the top of your game will look different in every decade, right? Because you're gonna have different priorities. You'll have different aspirations and also different strengths and weaknesses. But I think the way to think about aging, I think, is that it's a very personal thing as well, right? It's about defining, because I think chronological age, genuinely, I think it's losing its power to define and limit us. And people are more and more saying, you know what, I'm 41 or I'm 54, and this is what it's going to look like for me, right? And not be held back by other people. One metaphor I quite like for thinking about aging is thinking of it as like a video game. So, video games, you go through each level. So you start at level 1. So I'm now at level 54, having a great time in level 54. You don't dread when you're in a video game getting to 55. You look forward to it. You think, well, okay, that means I've graduated from level 54. I'm coming through with maybe some new treasures, some more skills and strengths. Yep. What challenges, what dragons await me to slay, right? In level 55, what can I look forward to? And I think that's a huge part of cracking this whole aging thing, is really embracing it, embracing the moment, right? Embracing the present without pining for the past and shrinking from the future, right? Living fully in whatever age you are now, going for it, in the best you can. And then also at the same time thinking, you know what? This is a stepping stone. There's another step up. It's not a step down, right? It's a step up to something more extraordinary and more rich. David Bowie had a wonderful, the singer, right?
Yeah.
Had a great quote. He said, aging is an extraordinary process by which you become the person you always should have been. And there's a kind of, I find that a really beautiful idea, that, because I think the cult of youth tells us that somehow, somewhere in our mythical, I don't know, is it late 20s, early 30s, we're at our peak, everything's great. And then it's just rubbish after that. And we're just trying to hold it together. Yeah. When in fact, I think the opposite is true, is that it's much more that kind of video game approach, or that kind of gradual building, that each of us is a work of art, that we're constantly, or like a sculpture, we're constantly chipping away, getting to the core, getting to the essence of who we are. Taking the Michelangelo idea, taking the slab of marble and revealing the angel within, right? And I kind of think that Bowie quote gets at that somehow aging is it's like a quest to get to the core of who you are, the truth of who you are. And there's so much magic and music and joy in that. And I think if you embrace it with that spirit, man, aging becomes something to celebrate rather than to abhor.
We're not aging, we're leveling up.
Yeah, that's an awful expression in the UK to use, but yeah.
Oh, it is?
It's shot through with all kinds of, it's a political grenade leveling up in the UK. But yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. Definitely.
Okay, cultural difference.
Yeah, it is very much. Yeah, it's moving up to the next level. It's moving forward. It's moving. It's improving in a sense, like a fine wine in some ways. The old cliche metaphor.
Well, that's great. So you're talking a little bit about social media, and of course now ageism. And I don't know if any of my listeners have seen this, but on Facebook, you were wearing an aging suit. So first off, what is an aging suit, and why did you have one on?
Yeah, wow. An aging suit is a pretty remarkable phenomenon. It was invented in the car industry so that young engineers could put on an aging suit, and effectively, you put it on and it's effectively adds 30 years to your life, right? So it's weighing you down. It makes your joints difficult to move and stiff. It blocks your hearing. It messes with your eyesight. And so I tried one on as I was researching my book, Bolder, to get a sense of what it might feel like to be 30 years older. And it was hell, right? It was so awful that I came away from, it was actually slightly traumatic. I came away thinking, wow, aging really is a massacre. I better give up this book because what am I, I better give up this book and book that appointment in the Zurich clinic, right? But actually there's a dishonesty about the aging suit because it does two things. One is it gives you shortcoming and disease and stuff that you could have in later. It gives you all of them. It gives you the full English breakfast of aging illnesses at once. And the once thing is crucial because you go, you literally put it on in 5 minutes and you don't have years to accommodate, to get used to changes, to maybe try and mitigate some of the, it just all happens instantly, like Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah.
And so it's not actually that helpful a way. It's useful for those engineers and it's moved out of the car industry and people use it. Architects use it for designing homes and so on. But for someone trying to get a sense of what it's like to be 30 years older, I would not recommend using an aging suit. I'd recommend sitting down with somebody who's 30 years older than you, just having a conversation. Which is a big part of when people say, how do we tackle ageism? One of the magic bullets is mixing up the generations. Getting together with people who are younger than you, older than you, because that, nothing shoots down ageist stereotypes than getting to know the people being stereotyped. So if you, and this was something I had realized, throughout history, different ages mixed. We in the fields, at home, in the market, everywhere, right? And then we got into the modern era, and we got into silos where you're surrounded by people more or less the same age as you most of the time. And that allows ageist stereotypes to flourish. And one way to take them down, as I say, is to mix up, to mingle with different generations. And I realized when I was doing the research for Boulder that I was stuck in a silo. I didn't really have many friends at all that were much older than me. I mean, most of my friends, a lot of them would be younger because I'm still playing hockey with younger guys. But I didn't really have anyone who was much older, certainly not much older. And so that's something I made a deliberate effort to, just to get out there. And I've got a couple of friends now, one who is 32 years older than me. And it just changes, shifts your perspective. It's healthy. I mean, it's everybody, the research shows that we're happier when we mix with different ages, but it also, I think, helps you realize that many of your deepest, darkest fears about aging are misplaced, right? And so I would recommend watching the video of the aging suit and then going out and making a friend who's 30 years older as a more useful lever to pull.
Definitely. Yeah, that would stink getting all of the ailments at once. But yeah, you're right. That's not how it happens. It's like you get one and then you get used to it. And then you kind of get another one. And yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty awful to get them all in one shot, let me tell you.
Oh, man. God. And so you've got, I think you had a post where you had 12 rules for aging boldly. If you had to pick one, if you could, I don't know, maybe two, that would be number one rule for aging boldly. What do you think that would be?
Oh gosh, out of the 12, I like to, I think learning is a really important one, right? Because that's something that the culture, especially the cult of youth culture, tells us that learning is something for young. We've got this traditional 3-stage life path. The first part of your life is learning. The second part is earning. And then the last part is resting. Yeah. And I think that with our longer lives, now that makes that old straitjacket of 3 stages makes no sense at all. We need to throw it out the window and have, much more fluid way of thinking about the life trajectory. And part of that is taking learning away from the early and stretching it all the way through our lives. And of course, people always say, well, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, that's not even true of dogs. Yeah. And it's certainly not true. Certainly not true of human beings. We can carry on learning stuff all the way to the very end. And not only can we do it, but it's actually good for us, right? I mean, it's pretty clear research shows that learning, exposing yourself to new ideas, to novelty, keeps you sharp, keeps you fit physically, cognitively. It's a very, very good way of keeping yourself in your kind of best zone, whatever age you are. So if I had to pick one out of the 12, I'd go with learning. Keep on learning. Lifelong learning, right? That expression that gets bandied around a lot these days.
I'm gonna have my mother-in-law listen to that part because she refuses to learn the remote control to the Apple TV. And it has like 5 buttons where the normal remote control that she uses has, 87 buttons on it. And she doesn't want to learn the one that has 5. So I've never understood that.
Yeah, that may be a power move or something. I don't know. It's not, the Apple TV one is pretty straightforward, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, definitely. Cool. And so as we get close to the end here, we could probably keep going for a while, but we do want to be respectful of time. I want to hit a little bit on your last book about hyperparenting really quickly, if we could. What is it, and why do we need to rescue our kids from all this hyperparenting?
Well, hyperparenting is basically good parenting run amok, right? It starts from a noble and natural instinct, which is to do the best for our children. And how can you argue with that? The trouble is that I think it's morphed into a caricature of itself, so that now I think a lot of parents feel under immense pressure to push, polish, and protect their children with superhuman zeal. Like, we feel we have to give our children the best of everything, and at the same time make them the best at everything. And I think the bottom line is that for a lot of kids, childhood has become this endless race to perfection, and it's not working, right? I mean, it's backfiring. It's clear. You look around. I mean, look at the problems with anxiety, body dysmorphia, physical. I mean, children need slowness, right? They need it perhaps even more than adults do. So slow parenting is about striking a balance. It's about saying, sure, children need to work hard. They need to strive and struggle and all that stuff. But they need to do that in the right dosage. They also need time just to slow down, to play freely, to let their minds wander, to daydream, to rest enough, to get enough sleep, right? To spend enough time not on screens. They need to get bored sometimes, right? We're also terrified of boredom. But throughout history, when a child said to a parent, "I'm bored," that was the child's problem, right? The parent would say, "Well, go outside and play, or find a friend," or they'd use that eternal expression, "Use your imagination." Yeah. Now a child says to a parent, "I'm bored," and the parent thinks, "Oh no, I'm failing as a parent. My kid's bored. Where's the iPad? Maybe we need another extracurricular in the schedule." Yeah. No, what you need to do is back off, slow down, and let the boredom happen. Because precisely in those moments of unstructured time that children learn how to think, use their imagination, get along with their peers, regulate their emotions, look into themselves, and work out who they are rather than what everyone else wants them to be. So slow is the alternative to hyperparenting. Not surprisingly, it's slow parenting, right? And it's about finding the right balance between doing too much for your children and doing too little. Giving them all the love and the support they need with no conditions attached. And it's about striking the right balance in the home so that everybody has enough time to reach for the stars and realize their full potential, but also to sometimes just to rest, recharge, and sometimes just to do nothing at all, right?
I always make the joke that growing up, I only told my parents one time that I was bored because on the farm, they just put us to work. So.
Yeah. You don't get away very much for that on a farm. It's true.
Tell my younger siblings, it's like, don't tell mom and dad you're bored. Find something for us to do. All right. And so, all right. I want to transition a little bit here to do some more philosophical questions. What is something that you would like to see 20 years from now be considered absolutely absurd? Or another way of saying that is, if you look back 20 years, what do you want to be like? I can't believe we used to do X.
Oh gosh, there's a handful of things. I got to pick one.
One or two. Yeah. Whatever.
Sure. Okay. I'll pick the two that we've drilled down into today.
Okay.
I hope that 20 years from now we look back and think, why did we ever think it was going to be so hard to slow down? Right? So that would be my first one. And then the second would be to do with ageism, right? That to look back now as we do, when we look back on things like feminism and the environment and racism and stuff, that things that seemed acceptable 20 years ago now seem extraordinary and perverse to us today. I hope that's the same with ageism, that we look back and think, wow, how could we ever have held those views of aging, right? So those would be the two I would hope for most, I think.
Break the stereotypes. All right. And obviously this would be the time now, I think, to recommend the books. I mean, I know we've been talking about a couple of them here, but the main two, you've got a couple other ones as well. What all books do you have? We'll make sure that we link to these in the show notes.
Sure. Well, In Praise of Slow, or in the United States, it's actually called In Praise of Slowness, same book, just different title. Okay. It is kind of Bible handbook of the slow movement. The second book is Under Pressure. That's about slow with parenting and education and children. The third book is called The Slow Fix, and it's about solving problems in everything from business to relationships to medicine without falling into short-term quick fixes. Yeah. The fourth book, of course, is Bolder, which is about rethinking our whole approach to aging. I've recently published a workbook called 30 Days to Slow, which was sort of like my pandemic baby. So those are my books. And if anyone wants to just learn anything more about the stuff I do, I have one website link, which is my name, Carl Honoré, carlhonoré.info. So that's a link tree with everything from digital courses to books to video, audio, social media. You can contact me there. I love to, hear from people, and I always write back. So that's the one-stop shop. It's carlhonoré.info.
Perfect. And you said you've got that workbook. That's great. And so since we've been mainly talking about two in praise of slowness and then Boulder, we will also have a couple copies for our listeners of those. And so the way that you get a copy is just leave an honest review on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and then copy and paste that into an email. Send that to asknate@retirementrescueradio.com with your username, your address, so that we can send that book to you, and we'll get that done. So, yeah. Okay. Any other, I guess, any personal habits that you have that have contributed to your success so far? You've got several books that you've written. You're still playing, hockey into your 50s. And what would you say has contributed to your success throughout your entire life?
Probably a pack of things. I mean, I'm originally a foreign correspondent journalist, so I'm a naturally curious person. So I'm always asking questions. I think that's been the source of a lot of my success, is just having an open mind and wanting to learn more and know more and understand more. So that's one thing. I come from a family of cooks and food, so eating well has always been an important part of my life. I've never really eaten industrialized processed food. Everything I eat is from scratch. Mm-hmm. So I love food is an important part of my life. I'm very active. I do some kind of sports every day, so that's another thing. I suppose those are probably three key ones.
Perfect. Okay. And so any parting piece of guidance that you'd like to give my listeners before we go?
Well, maybe I'll finish with a quote from Mae West, the actress, who said once, "Anything worth doing is worth doing slowly." And I think that's a very useful guiding light for all of us at any age, but maybe especially for your audience as they get to a stage when they maybe have more control over how fast they do things. Something to keep simmering in the back of your mind. Anything worth doing is usually worth doing slowly.
Embrace the slow.
Find your inner tortoise. He's in there.
Find your inner tortoise. I like that. Okay. Well then, Carl, really appreciate the time that you've spent here. I know you've gone so, deep into these different areas of slowness, balance, aging well. So I feel like you're going to help a lot of my clients have a better retirement because of that, if they consume some of your resources and really start to put some of the stuff that you teach into play.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. Anytime I get to talk about these things, I learn something new. So it's been a real pleasure chatting with you, and I hope we get a chance to do it again sometime.
You bet. We'll come up with maybe we'll dive deeper into the parenting one. I think that'd be another one. In this Western culture, I think that we need to do that a lot.
Yeah, especially after the pandemic. I think a lot of people have thought hard about their parenting, and it's been a lot of pressures. So there could be easily another episode in that alone.
Definitely. Well, appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Nate.
You bet. Have a great one.
Cheers. Same to you.